Who the hell left my door unlocked? She steps in, calm, eyes steady. I didn't come to ask. I came to collect. The whole room freezes. And the man in the wheelchair? He hasn't heard that voice in 24 years. Comment where you're listening from today. Take a breath. Enjoy the story. The morning light filtered through the glass walls of Henderson Financial Management as David Martinez adjusted his tie for the third time. 22 years he'd worked his way up from junior analyst to senior investment advisor, and today felt different. The quarterly board meeting always made him nervous, but something in CEO William Henderson's voice during yesterday's call had set his stomach churning. David, could you step into my office? Henderson's secretary, Mrs. Chen, appeared at his cubicle with an expression he couldn't read. The corner office overlooked downtown Seattle, where Henderson Financial had grown from a small venture capital firm to managing over $2 billion in assets. William Henderson sat behind his mahogany desk, his silver hair perfectly styled despite being 73. The man who'd built this empire from nothing, who'd mentored David through every promotion, looked unusually serious. Sit down, son. Henderson's use of the word son wasn't unusual. He'd called David that for years, ever since David had started working double shifts to pay for his finance degree while supporting his ailing mother. But today, it felt weighted with meaning. I've been thinking about succession planning, Henderson began, shuffling through papers on his desk. The board's been pressuring me to announce my retirement timeline. I'm 73, and frankly, this company needs fresh leadership. David's heart raced. He'd dreamed of this moment, worked toward it through countless late nights, analyzing market trends and building client relationships. His expertise in healthcare investments had brought in millions, particularly his successful predictions about organ transplant technology companies and chronic illness treatment centers. I want you to know, Henderson continued, that you've been like family to me. When your mother needed that kidney transplant 5 years ago, and you were struggling with the hospital bills, I saw your dedication, your financial management skills, your understanding of healthcare markets. You've been invaluable. Thank you, sir. This company has been my life. Henderson stood and walked to the window. There's something I need to tell you about my succession plan. It's complicated. Before David could respond, Henderson's phone buzzed. Sir, the board members are arriving early. They have some urgent news about the merger discussions. Send them in, Henderson said, his voice tight. The door opened, and 3 board members entered, their faces grave. Margaret Thornton, the lead board member, clutched a manila envelope. William, we've received some unexpected information that changes everything about the succession plan, she said, glancing nervously at David. It concerns your daughters. David frowned. In all his years working closely with Henderson, the man had never mentioned having children. He'd always assumed Henderson was childless, which made sense given his dedication to the company and his tendency to treat employees like family. My daughters? Henderson's voice cracked slightly. Margaret opened the envelope and pulled out official-looking documents. We've been contacted by a law firm representing 2 young women, twins actually. They're claiming to be your biological daughters, and they have DNA test results to prove it. The room fell silent except for the hum of the air conditioning. David watched Henderson's face drain of color. That's impossible, Henderson whispered. I don't have... The documents are legitimate, Margaret interrupted. William, these young women are 24 years old. They were adopted as infants and have been searching for their biological father. They're both Harvard MBA graduates, and according to their legal team, they're prepared to claim their inheritance rights. David's mind raced. If Henderson had biological children, everything would change. His years of dedication, his dreams of leading the company, his financial planning for his family's future, all of it suddenly felt uncertain. Henderson sank into his chair, his hands shaking. What do they want? They want to meet you, Margaret said softly. But there's more. They've been tracking the company's performance, and they believe they have a legal right to be considered for leadership positions. They're requesting a meeting with the board to discuss the succession plan. David felt the world tilting. "Sir, what does this mean for—" "I don't know." Henderson cut him off, his voice barely audible. "I need time to process this." Margaret placed a photograph on the desk. "This is them. Their names are Sarah and Michelle Williams." David glanced at the photo and felt his blood turn to ice. Two beautiful young black women smiled back at him from what appeared to be a graduation photo. Something about their eyes, their confident expressions, struck him as familiar, but he couldn't place why. "They'll be here tomorrow morning," Margaret announced. "They want to meet you privately first, William, and then with the board to discuss their role in the company's future." As the board members filed out, Henderson remained seated, staring at the photograph. David stood frozen, watching his mentor, the man he'd considered a father figure, grapple with a revelation that threatened to destroy everything David had worked for. "David," Henderson said without looking up, "I think you should go home early today. Tomorrow is going to change everything." As David walked toward the door, his mind spinning with questions and fears, Henderson called out one more time. "David, there's something else I need to tell you about your past, about why I took such an interest in your career. But first, I need to face these young women who claim to be my daughters." David paused, his hand on the doorknob, a chill running down his spine. What could Henderson possibly know about his past that he didn't know himself? David barely slept that night. He sat at his kitchen table, surrounded by financial reports and investment portfolios he'd brought home. But his mind couldn't focus on market analysis or healthcare sector projections. Instead, he kept replaying Henderson's words. "There's something else I need to tell you about your past." At 46, David thought he knew his story. Born to Maria Martinez, a single mother who'd worked 3 jobs to support them after his father abandoned them when David was 2. She'd sacrificed everything for his education, working nights at the hospital as a cleaning supervisor while taking care of elderly patients during the day. When she needed the kidney transplant, David had liquidated his entire investment portfolio to cover the medical expenses Henderson's insurance hadn't covered. But now, questions plagued him. Why had Henderson always shown such personal interest in his career? Why had he paid for David's mother's funeral expenses 3 years ago, claiming it was just company compassion? And why did those twins in the photograph seem somehow familiar? David arrived at the office early, hoping to catch Henderson before the meeting with his alleged daughters. The building felt different in the pre-dawn darkness, as if the very foundations had shifted overnight. He found Henderson in his office, still wearing yesterday's clothes, surrounded by old files and documents. "You didn't go home," David observed. Henderson looked up, his eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion. "I've been going through old records, trying to understand how this happened." "David, sit down. Before they arrive, I need to explain something that's going to be difficult to hear." David's stomach clenched as he took a seat. Through the window, Seattle was waking up, early commuters crossing the street, coffee shops opening, life continuing normally while his world threatened to collapse. 25 years ago, I made some terrible decisions," Henderson began, his voice hoarse. "I was young, ambitious, and frankly racist in ways I'm deeply ashamed of now. The company was just starting to grow, and I was engaged to a woman from an old Seattle family, the kind of marriage that would secure business connections and social standing." David listened, his hands gripping the armrests of his chair. "But I also had a relationship with a young black woman named Angela Williams. She was brilliant, worked as a financial analyst at a competing firm. We kept our relationship secret because of my cowardice, because I was too concerned about what people would think, what it would mean for my business prospects." The name Williams hit David like a physical blow, the twins' last name. "When Angela told me she was pregnant," Henderson continued, his voice breaking, "I panicked. I was getting married in 3 months and I couldn't see past my own selfishness and prejudice. I gave her money and told her I couldn't be part of the children's lives. I told her to put them up for adoption." "Children?" David whispered. "Twins. Girls." Angela was heartbroken, but she was young and alone, and I convinced her it was the best option. I paid for a private adoption through a law firm, and I tried to forget it ever happened." Henderson stood and walked to his safe, withdrawing a thick folder. "But I couldn't forget. Over the years, I've been tracking their progress through the adoption agency. I knew they were placed with a good family, that they were both excelling in school, that they went to college on scholarships. David's mind raced. Why are you telling me this now? Henderson returned to his desk, the folder heavy in his hands. Because there's more to this story. The adoption wasn't the only secret I've been keeping. He opened the folder and pulled out several documents. Birth certificates, hospital records, adoption papers. David saw his own name on several of the forms, and his confusion deepened. The agency I used, Henderson continued, it specialized in what they called complex family situations. They handled my daughter's adoption, but they also handled other cases, including yours. The room seemed to spin. What are you talking about? Your mother, Maria. She wasn't your biological mother, David. She was your adoptive mother. David shot to his feet, the chair falling backward. That's impossible. She would have told me. We went through everything together. Her illness, the transplant, the financial struggles. She would never have lied to me about something like that. Henderson's eyes filled with tears. She didn't lie, David. She was told never to tell you, as part of the adoption agreement. The biological parents specifically requested that you never know the truth. Who? David's voice was barely audible. Who were my biological parents? Henderson opened his mouth to answer, but was interrupted by Mrs. Chen's voice over the intercom. Mr. Henderson, your visitors have arrived. Sarah and Michelle Williams are here for their 9 o'clock appointment. Through the glass wall of Henderson's office, David could see 2 young women in the reception area. Even from a distance, he could see they were poised, professional, and strikingly beautiful. They wore tailored business suits and carried themselves with the confidence of people accustomed to boardrooms and high-stakes negotiations. I need to finish telling you the truth before they come in, Henderson said urgently. David, your biological father. The office door opened, and Margaret Thornton entered with the 2 young women. Up close, David could see they were indeed identical twins, though they'd styled themselves differently. Sarah wore her hair in a sleek bob and carried a leather briefcase, while Michelle had longer hair and wore subtle jewelry that suggested sophisticated taste. Both had the same piercing, intelligent eyes he'd noticed in the photograph. Mr. Henderson, Sarah said, extending her hand. I'm Sarah Williams, and this is my sister Michelle. Thank you for agreeing to meet with us. Henderson struggled to compose himself, wiping his eyes quickly. Of course, please sit down. As the twins settled into chairs across from Henderson's desk, Michelle's gaze fell on David. I'm sorry. We weren't expecting anyone else to be present for this initial meeting. This is David Martinez, Henderson said carefully. My senior investment advisor and someone who needs to be part of this conversation. David studied the twins' faces, searching for some resemblance to Henderson, but finding himself unsettled by how familiar they seemed in a way he couldn't place. Sarah opened her briefcase and withdrew several documents. We've brought the DNA test results, as well as our academic and professional credentials. We want you to know that our interest in connecting with you isn't purely financial, though we do believe we have legal rights regarding your company's succession planning. We've both completed Harvard MBAs with concentrations in healthcare investment and venture capital, Michelle added. We've been following Henderson Financial's performance for years, particularly your successful investments in medical technology companies and organ transplant research facilities. David felt a strange recognition at their shared interest in healthcare investments, the same sector that had defined his own career success. We understand this is difficult, Sarah continued, and we want to approach this situation with respect for everyone involved. But we also want you to know that we're not just your biological children. We're qualified to contribute to this company's future. Henderson's hands trembled as he looked at the DNA results. 24 years, he whispered. I've missed 24 years of your lives. Michelle's expression softened slightly. We're not here for a tearful reunion. We had wonderful adoptive parents who gave us everything we needed. But we do want to understand our biological heritage, and we want to be considered fairly in your succession planning. As David watched this conversation unfold, Henderson's earlier revelation echoed in his mind. If his adoptive mother, Maria, wasn't his biological mother, then who was? And why had Henderson seemed on the verge of telling him something crucial about his biological father before the twins arrived? Sarah turned to David with a curious expression. "Mr. Martinez, forgive me for asking, but have we met before? You seem familiar somehow." Before David could respond, Michelle added, "I was thinking the same thing. There's something about your eyes, your expressions. It's strange, but you remind me of someone." Henderson's face went pale as he looked between David and the twins, and David realized with growing horror that Henderson hadn't finished his revelation about David's biological parents. "Mr. Henderson," David said slowly, "you need to finish what you were telling me before they arrived." The silence in Henderson's office stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Sarah and Michelle exchanged puzzled glances, sensing the undercurrent of tension they'd walked into. Henderson's face had gone ashen, his hands visibly shaking as he gripped the edge of his desk. "What's going on?" Michelle asked, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to getting straight answers in boardrooms. "Mr. Martinez, what was he telling you?" David couldn't take his eyes off Henderson, whose mouth opened and closed without sound. The older man looked like he was drowning in his own secrets, 25 years of buried truth finally surfacing. "William," Margaret Thornton said from the doorway, where she'd been quietly observing, "perhaps we should postpone this meeting until—" "No," Henderson said suddenly, his voice hoarse but determined. "They deserve to know. All of them deserve to know." Sarah leaned forward in her chair. "Know what exactly?" Henderson walked to his window, his back to the room. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "David, your biological father. He was Angela Williams's husband." The words hit the room like a physical force. David felt the blood drain from his face as the implication crashed over him. Sarah gasped audibly, while Michelle's professional composure cracked for the first time. "What are you saying?" David asked, though part of him already understood. Henderson turned around, tears streaming down his cheeks. "Angela Williams was married to Roberto Martinez, your father, David. After I abandoned her and refused to acknowledge my daughters, she went back to her husband. She was devastated, heartbroken, and Roberto tried to help her heal." Michelle stood up slowly, her hand pressed to her chest. "Are you telling us that David is our half-brother?" Henderson finished. "Angela became pregnant again, with Roberto. But she was struggling with severe depression after giving up Sarah and Michelle. When David was born, she couldn't cope. The guilt, the trauma of having given up her daughters, it was destroying her mental health. She needed intensive treatment for chronic depression and anxiety." David sank into his chair, his entire world reshaping itself around this revelation. "The adoption agency," he whispered. "Roberto brought you to the same agency," Henderson continued. "He couldn't care for an infant, while Angela was hospitalized for treatment. He thought it would be temporary, just until she recovered. But Angela never fully recovered from the trauma of losing her first children. The depression led to other health complications, and eventually, she needed a kidney transplant." Sarah's voice was tight with emotion. "Our biological mother, she's been alive all this time?" Henderson nodded miserably. "Roberto couldn't afford the medical expenses, the transplant, the ongoing treatment, the specialized care. He was working 3 jobs, but it wasn't enough. He made the heartbreaking decision to allow David's adoption to become permanent, with the condition that he could never know the truth." "Maria Martinez," David said, the pieces falling into place. "My adoptive mother. She worked at the hospital. She was Angela's nurse," Henderson confirmed. "She'd been caring for Angela during her treatment, and she fell in love with you. When Roberto couldn't manage the financial burden and Angela's condition worsened, Maria offered to adopt you. She promised Roberto she'd give you the best life possible." Michelle was crying now, her professional facade completely gone. So our biological mother gave us up, then had another child she also couldn't keep, and then needed a kidney transplant. Where is she now? Henderson's silence answered the question before he spoke. Angela died 6 years ago. Complications from the chronic illness despite the transplant. Roberto contacted me afterward. He'd been tracking my investment success through financial publications, and he asked me to help with David's mother's medical expenses. That's how I knew about Maria's kidney transplant. David felt like he was falling through space. You knew. All these years you knew I was Angela's son, and you never told me. I wanted to, Henderson said desperately. Especially after Maria died, I wanted to tell you about your sisters, about Angela. But I was a coward. I was afraid of losing you, afraid of facing what I'd done to your family. Sarah wiped her eyes and stood up, pacing to the window. Let me understand this. You abandoned our pregnant mother 25 years ago. She gave us up for adoption because she was alone and heartbroken. Then she had another child, our half-brother, who also had to be given up because she couldn't cope with the trauma you caused. And throughout all of this, you knew about David, hired him, mentored him, but never told him the truth. I tried to make amends the only way I knew how, Henderson said weakly. I made sure David had opportunities, that his adoptive mother got the best medical care when she needed it. I've been trying to take care of him like family because he is family. Michelle turned from the window to face David. All these years, we've been searching for our biological family, and our half-brother has been working in the same building as our biological father. David looked at the twins, his sisters, and felt a strange mix of grief and wonder. They shared the same eyes, the same determined expression he saw in the mirror. Their passion for healthcare investment suddenly made sense. It was in their DNA, connected to their mother's struggles with chronic illness. There's more, Henderson said quietly. Roberto didn't just ask me to help with medical expenses. Before he died 2 years ago, he made me promise to tell you the truth if anything ever happened that would bring you and your sisters together. Roberto's dead too? David asked, his voice hollow. Henderson nodded. Heart attack. He worked himself to death trying to pay for Angela's care and establish a small investment fund for your future. He left everything to you, David. It's been sitting in a trust account, waiting for you to claim it. Sarah sat back down heavily. So we're orphans, all 3 of us. But we have each other now, Michelle said softly, looking at David with new recognition. That's why you seem familiar. We have the same expressions, the same way of analyzing situations. David studied their faces and saw it too. Subtle similarities he'd dismissed as coincidence. This is why you both went into finance, isn't it? Like me. Healthcare investment specifically, Sarah confirmed. We've been drawn to companies that develop treatment for chronic illnesses, organ transplant technology, financial management systems for medical facilities. It's like we've been trying to solve our mother's problems without knowing it. Henderson cleared his throat. There's one more thing. Roberto left detailed letters for each of you, explaining everything from his perspective. And he left something else. Angela's medical records, her letters to you children, and her wishes for your futures. He opened his desk drawer and withdrew 3 sealed envelopes, each marked with a name. David, Sarah, and Michelle. She wrote these during her treatment, Henderson explained. She wanted you to know she never stopped loving you, and she wanted you to find each other someday. As David held his envelope, feeling the weight of his mother's words, Mrs. Chen's voice came through the intercom again. Mr. Henderson, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's an urgent call from the hospital. Something about the organ donation center you've been investing in. They said it's about a major breakthrough in kidney transplant compatibility, and they need immediate funding decisions. The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the room. Even in death, Angela Williams was still connecting her children through their shared mission to help others facing the same medical challenges she'd endured. Sarah stood up, her business instincts reasserting themselves. Mr. Henderson, we need to discuss the succession plan. But first, I think the three of us need time to process this information and read our mother's letters. Michelle nodded, then looked at David. Would you like to read them together? As a family? David felt tears he'd been holding back finally fall. I'd like that very much. As they prepared to leave Henderson's office, Sarah turned back to the man who had shaped all their lives through his choices and his cowardice. The succession plan can wait, she said. But this company built on healthcare investments, on helping families like ours. That's something we need to talk about. All three of us. Henderson nodded, understanding that his biological daughters and the son of the woman he'd wronged were now united in a way he'd never expected. The company he'd built through decades of guilt and attempted redemption would now be in the hands of the family he'd torn apart. But as David walked out with his sisters, envelope in hand, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was still one more secret waiting to be revealed. Something in his mother's letter that would change everything once again. 3 hours later, David sat in a quiet corner booth at Café Luna, a small restaurant near the waterfront that Michelle had suggested. The lunch crowd provided enough ambient noise to ensure privacy, but David barely noticed his surroundings. His attention was fixed on the unopened envelope in his hands, his biological mother's final words to him. Sarah and Michelle sat across from him, their own letters already read, their faces streaked with tears. They'd arrived first and had taken the difficult step of reading Angela's words together, supporting each other through revelations that had shaken them both. Take your time, Sarah said gently. We know this is overwhelming. David looked at his sisters. The words still felt surreal, and saw the same mix of grief and determination in their eyes that he felt in his own chest. Did your letters, did they explain why she made the choices she did? Michelle nodded, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. She wrote them during her kidney transplant recovery. She was very weak, but she wanted to make sure we understood that giving us up wasn't about not loving us. She was 19, alone, and Henderson had made it clear he wanted nothing to do with us. She also explained why she couldn't keep you either, Sarah added softly. After losing us, she developed severe postpartum depression and chronic anxiety. When she found out she was pregnant again with Roberto, she was terrified she'd hurt you or herself. The guilt was eating her alive. David's hands trembled as he opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter on hospital stationery, the writing shaky but determined. There was also a smaller sealed envelope marked "Private for David only" and what appeared to be legal documents. He began reading aloud. My dearest David, if you're reading this, then you've found your sisters and learned the truth about our family. I pray that you can forgive me for the choices I made, and that you understand they came from love, not abandonment. By the time you read this, I'll likely be gone. The doctors say the kidney transplant was successful, but my body has been through so much. I want you to know that giving you to Maria was the hardest and most loving thing I ever did. She promised to tell you about me when you were old enough, but I made her swear to wait until you found Sarah and Michelle. I wanted you to be whole, to have your complete family, before learning about the mother who couldn't keep you. David's voice cracked, and he paused. Michelle reached across the table and squeezed his hand. She loved us, she whispered. She loved all of us so much it nearly destroyed her. David continued reading. Roberto tried so hard to help me heal. He knew about your sisters, and he understood why I couldn't let you go completely. That's why he agreed to the open adoption arrangement with Maria, so I could still see you sometimes, even if you didn't know who I was. David looked up sharply. She saw me? When? Sarah consulted her own letter. She mentions in ours that she attended some of your school events. She was there when you graduated high school, when you started college. Maria knew and allowed it. The revelation hit David like a physical blow. All those times his adoptive mother had mentioned a friend from the hospital who asked about his progress, who'd contributed anonymously to his college fund. It had been Angela, watching from a distance, loving him the only way she could. David returned to the letter. The three of you share more than blood. You all chose careers in healthcare investment and financial management because you inherited my passion for helping others navigate medical crises. I saw how the lack of proper financial planning and healthcare coverage destroyed families like ours. I dreamed of creating systems to help other families avoid what we went through. Roberto and I started a small investment company focused on medical technology and healthcare accessibility. We put every spare dollar into research companies developing better treatments for kidney disease, depression, and organ transplant compatibility. When I got sick, we had to liquidate most of it to pay for my treatment, but Roberto saved one investment that has grown significantly. David looked at the legal documents, stock certificates for a biotech company called LifeBridge Technologies, specializing in organ transplant compatibility research. The certificates were dated 15 years ago, and according to the attached valuation statement, they were now worth over $3 million. There's more, David continued reading. LifeBridge Technologies is developing a revolutionary system for matching organ donors with recipients, reducing rejection rates by 60%. Roberto believed this technology could save thousands of lives and generate significant returns for investors who supported early-stage medical research. He wanted you three to inherit not just money, but a mission. I've watched Henderson Financial from afar, and I know William has built his success partly on guilt over what he did to our family. His investments in healthcare companies, his donations to organ donation centers. He's been trying to atone for his mistakes. But you three can do more than atone. You can heal. David paused, looking at his sisters. She wanted us to work together. Keep reading, Michelle urged. There's something about Henderson Financial at the end of her letter. David found the passage. By now you know that William Henderson is your biological father, Sarah and Michelle. What you may not know is that Roberto made him promise to include all three of you in his succession planning if you ever found each other. Roberto had evidence of William's financial irregularities from the early days of the company, nothing criminal, but enough to damage his reputation. Roberto never used it as blackmail, but he made William understand that he owed a debt to this family that could only be repaid by ensuring your futures were secure. David felt the room spinning. Financial irregularities? Sarah pulled out another document from her envelope. Our letter mentions it too. Apparently, in the early days of Henderson Financial, William used some questionable investment practices, not illegal but unethical. Roberto documented everything because he was working at a competing firm at the time. So Henderson's guilt isn't just about abandoning your mother, David realized. He's also been afraid that Roberto's information could destroy his reputation and his company. Michelle nodded grimly, which explains why he's been so generous with you over the years, and why he's never tried to contest our claim to be included in the succession planning. David opened the smaller sealed envelope marked Private, and found one final message. David, there's something I need you to know that I couldn't tell your sisters. Roberto wasn't just documenting William's business practices. He was investigating them because he suspected William was deliberately targeting healthcare companies that competed with his own investments. Roberto believed William was using inside information to manipulate medical technology stocks. Roberto never proved it definitively, but he had enough evidence to raise serious questions. He kept this information as insurance to protect our family if William ever tried to deny his responsibilities to you children. The choice is yours now. You can use this information to ensure your rightful place in the company, or you can forge a different path. But remember, whatever you choose, do it as a family. You three are stronger together than any of us ever were alone. David looked up to find Sarah and Michelle watching him intently. What did the private note say? Sarah asked. David hesitated, then shared the contents. As he spoke, he watched his sister's expressions shift from surprise to anger to determination. So Henderson might have been involved in stock manipulation? Michelle asked. Using his position to influence medical technology investments? Roberto suspected it, but never proved it, David clarified. The question is, what do we do with this information? Sarah leaned back in her chair, her business mind clearly working. We have several options. We could expose Henderson and potentially destroy the company, But that would hurt a lot of innocent employees and clients. We could use the information to force him to give us control of the company, or we could use our mother's LifeBridge Technologies investment as leverage to create something better, Michelle finished. $3 million isn't enough to start our own firm, but it's enough to make Henderson an offer he can't refuse. David felt a strange sense of completion, as if all the pieces of his life were finally falling into place. What kind of offer? Sarah smiled for the first time since they'd met. A merger. We bring LifeBridge Technologies into Henderson Financial. We become equal partners in the firm, and we transform the company into something our mother would have been proud of. A healthcare investment firm that actually helps families instead of exploiting them. And if Henderson refuses? David asked. Michelle's expression hardened. Then we show him what happens when you abandon your family twice. As they sat there, three siblings united by tragedy and strengthened by truth, David realized that their mother's greatest gift wasn't the money or the company shares. It was each other. But he also sensed that their confrontation with Henderson would reveal one final secret that could either unite their new family forever or tear it apart before it truly began. The next morning, David arrived at Henderson Financial to find the building buzzing with unusual activity. Security guards flanked the entrance, and several men in expensive suits were examining documents in the lobby. His stomach dropped as he recognized the telltale signs of a federal investigation. Sarah and Michelle were already waiting in the conference room when he arrived, both looking as concerned as he felt. Through the glass walls, they could see FBI agents setting up equipment in Henderson's office, while Henderson himself sat in a smaller conference room with his attorney. "This can't be a coincidence," Michelle said, her voice tight with worry. "The day after we discover Roberto's evidence about financial irregularities, the FBI shows up." Margaret Thornton entered the conference room, her face pale and drawn. "I need to speak with all three of you immediately. What I'm about to tell you will be difficult, but you need to know the truth before this gets any worse." David felt his chest tighten. "What's happening, Margaret?" She sat down heavily, aging 10 years in the span of a moment. 6 months ago, William received a diagnosis of early-stage Alzheimer's disease. He's been trying to manage it quietly, but his judgment has been increasingly impaired. Yesterday, after your meeting, he made some very poor decisions. Sarah leaned forward. "What kind of decisions?" "He contacted the FBI himself," Margaret said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He turned over Roberto's evidence about his past financial practices, and he also confessed to something we didn't know. He's been embezzling funds from client accounts to pay for experimental Alzheimer's treatments not covered by insurance." The room fell silent, except for the hum of activity outside. David felt like he was watching his entire world collapse in real time. "How much?" Michelle asked, her financial training taking over. "Nearly $2 million over the past year," Margaret replied. "He's been moving money from high net worth accounts, trying to replace it through aggressive trades in healthcare stocks. When those trades failed, he got desperate." David remembered all the late nights Henderson had been working recently, all the stress he'd attributed to normal business pressures. "The Alzheimer's. Is that why he finally told us the truth about our family?" Margaret nodded. "His doctor warned him that his condition would worsen rapidly. He wanted to make amends while he still could think clearly. But the disease has also affected his impulse control and decision-making abilities." Through the conference room windows, they watched as FBI agents emerged from Henderson's office carrying boxes of files and computer equipment. Henderson himself looked small and fragile, nothing like the powerful businessman who had mentored David for 22 years. "Where does this leave the company?" Sarah asked. "And what about all the employees, the clients whose money he took?" "The company has insurance for this type of situation," Margaret explained. "But it will likely mean significant restructuring, possible bankruptcy, and definitely criminal charges for William. Unless—" She looked at the three siblings with an expression David had never seen before. Hope mixed with desperation. "Unless what?" David prompted. "Unless the company has new leadership with clean records and enough capital injection to stabilize operations immediately." The board has been discussing emergency succession plans, and frankly, you three are our only viable option. Michelle stood and began pacing. You're asking us to take over a company that's under federal investigation, with embezzled client funds and a CEO facing criminal charges. I'm asking you to save a company that employs 200 people and manages retirement funds for thousands of families, Margaret replied. Many of those families depend on healthcare investments for their medical expenses, just like your own family did. David thought about all the clients he'd worked with over the years, elderly couples managing chronic illness expenses, young families saving for children's medical treatments, healthcare workers building retirement portfolios. Henderson's crimes would destroy their financial security. The LifeBridge Technologies investment, Sarah said suddenly. Mother's $3 million. If we liquidate it immediately and use the funds to begin restitution, it would show good faith to the FBI and the clients, David finished. But we'd be giving up our mother's legacy to clean up Henderson's mess. No, Michelle said firmly. We'd be using our mother's legacy exactly as she intended, to help families navigate medical and financial crises. Margaret's phone buzzed, and she answered it quickly. Yes, I understand. We'll be right there. She hung up and looked at them gravely. The FBI wants to interview all three of you. They know about Roberto's evidence and your family connection to William. They need to determine if you were involved in any of the financial irregularities. As they walked toward the smaller conference room where FBI agents waited, David felt the weight of 22 years of loyalty to Henderson warring with his responsibility to his newfound family and the innocent people whose lives hung in the balance. Special Agent Jennifer Collins was a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She had arranged 3 chairs facing her across a small table, and David noticed recording equipment set up in the corner. I'll be direct, Agent Collins began after they were seated. We've been investigating Henderson Financial for 6 months, following tips about unusual trading patterns in healthcare stocks. Mr. Henderson's confession yesterday confirmed our suspicions about the embezzlement, but we have questions about the timing of your involvement. She opened a file and pulled out photographs, surveillance images of David, Sarah, and Michelle entering and leaving the building over the past 2 days. Ms. Williams, she addressed Sarah. You and your sister have been researching Henderson Financial for months, correct? Making inquiries about succession planning, requesting financial records through legal channels. Yes, Sarah replied carefully. We recently discovered our biological connection to Mr. Henderson and wanted to understand our potential inheritance rights. And Mr. Martinez, Agent Collins turned to David. You've been Mr. Henderson's most trusted advisor for over 2 decades. Are you telling us you had no knowledge of his embezzlement activities? David felt his sister's eyes on him as he answered. I suspected something was wrong recently. He was working unusual hours, seemed stressed about client accounts, but I never imagined he was stealing from them. Agent Collins consulted her notes. We found evidence that Roberto Martinez, your biological father, had been investigating Mr. Henderson's business practices for years. He documented several instances of potential insider trading and market manipulation. Were you aware of this information? Not until yesterday, David said honestly. Roberto died 2 years ago, and my adoptive mother never told me about any of this. The agent's expression softened slightly. Mr. Martinez, we also found something else in Mr. Henderson's files that you need to know about. She pulled out another document, a letter with David's name on it, written in Henderson's handwriting. Mr. Henderson wrote this letter 6 months ago when he first received his diagnosis. He never sent it, but it explains why he's been so protective of your career and why he finally decided to confess. David's hands shook as he took the letter. His sisters leaned closer as he read aloud. David, if you're reading this, then my mind has finally betrayed me completely, and you've learned the truth about what I've done. Not just to your family 25 years ago, but to this company and our clients recently. I need you to know that every opportunity I gave you, every promotion, every bonus, it was all earned. You are the most talented financial advisor I've ever worked with, and your expertise in healthcare investments has saved this company more times than I can count. But I also need you to know that I've been stealing from our clients to pay for experimental treatments for my Alzheimer's disease. I've been terrified of losing my mind, of forgetting Angela and Roberto and all the damage I caused your family. The irony isn't lost on me. I'm destroying more families in my attempt to remember the family I destroyed years ago. By the time you read this, I'll likely be in prison or dead. I'm asking you to do what I couldn't. Take care of the families I've hurt. Use the company to help them, not exploit them. Be the man I never had the courage to be. The room was quiet, except for the sound of David's quiet sobs. Agent Collins waited respectfully before continuing. Mr.
Henderson has agreed to cooperate fully with our investigation in exchange for a recommendation of leniency due to his medical condition, but the company needs immediate leadership to begin restitution and restore client confidence. She looked at all three siblings. The board has proposed that you three take immediate control of Henderson Financial with federal oversight to stabilize operations and begin the recovery process.
You would be running a company under investigation, but you'd also be in position to help the families your biological father wanted to protect and that your biological mother dreamed of helping. Sarah, Michelle, and David exchanged looks. 24 years of separation dissolving in a moment of shared purpose. What happens to Henderson? David asked. House arrest pending trial given his medical condition, Agent Collins replied. But he'll likely spend his remaining lucid years in federal prison. As they sat there, faced with the choice between walking away from Henderson's crimes or stepping forward to clean up the mess and fulfill their parents' dreams, David realized this was the moment that would define not just their careers, but their identity as a family. We need a few minutes to discuss this, Michelle said. Agent Collins nodded and stepped outside, leaving the three siblings alone with the most important decision of their lives. 6 months later, David stood in the renovated boardroom of what was now called Martinez Williams Financial, watching the Seattle skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. The nameplate on the conference table read, David Martinez, Chief Executive Officer. But the title felt less important than the family photos now displayed on his desk, pictures of him with Sarah and Michelle at various company events, their first Thanksgiving together, and a framed copy of their mother's letter. The transformation had been grueling. Those first weeks after accepting the FBI's proposal had tested every ounce of strength the three siblings possessed. They'd worked 18-hour days, meeting with federal investigators, angry clients, and worried employees while trying to stabilize a company hemorrhaging trust and capital. David, they're ready for you in conference room B, came Sarah's voice through the intercom. As chief financial officer, she'd been instrumental in restructuring the company's debt and implementing new oversight systems that satisfied both federal regulators and their insurance providers. David walked down the hallway, passing the memorial wall they'd created to honor Angela and Roberto Martinez. The display included photos of their parents, copies of Angela's letters, and a plaque dedicating the company to families navigating medical and financial challenges together. In conference room B, Michelle was presenting their quarterly results to a group of clients, many of whom had initially threatened lawsuits when Henderson's embezzlement came to light. As chief investment officer, Michelle had exceeded everyone's expectations, turning the company's focus toward ethical healthcare investments that generated both solid returns and meaningful social impact. As you can see, Michelle was saying, pointing to charts on the wall-mounted screen, our partnership with LifeBridge Technologies has not only restored the stolen funds to affected accounts, but has also generated an average return of 12% for our clients this quarter. Mrs. Patterson, an elderly client whose retirement account had been among those Henderson had embezzled from, raised her hand. Michelle, dear, I have to ask, why did you children choose to save this company instead of just starting fresh somewhere else? Michelle looked toward David and Sarah, sharing one of those silent communications that had developed between them over the past months. Mrs. Patterson, we learned that our biological mother spent her final years dreaming of a company that would help families like yours, and like ours, navigate the financial challenges that come with serious medical conditions. We couldn't let that dream die because of one man's mistakes. David stepped forward. We also discovered that many of you have stories similar to ours. Families separated by financial stress, medical expenses that destroy savings, dreams deferred because of healthcare costs. Our mother wrote in her letter that we were stronger together than alone. That turned out to be true not just for us, but for this entire community of clients. After the meeting ended and the clients left, most of them now among the company's strongest advocates, the three siblings gathered in David's office for their weekly family meeting. It had become their tradition, mixing business planning with personal connection. "I have news," Sarah announced, settling into her favorite chair with a cup of coffee. "The FBI officially closed their investigation today. We're no longer operating under federal oversight." David felt a weight lift from his shoulders. "And Henderson?" "Sentenced to 3 years house arrest with community service," Michelle reported. Given his Alzheimer's progression, the judge felt prison would be inhumane. He'll be working with a non-profit that provides financial counseling to families dealing with medical bankruptcies. Felt appropriate, David thought. Henderson would spend his remaining lucid years helping the kinds of families he'd once exploited. "There's something else," Sarah continued, pulling out an official-looking document. "The board unanimously approved our proposal to establish the Angela Martinez Foundation. We're officially launching next month with our first grant program, college scholarships for children who've been separated from their biological families due to medical or financial hardships." David felt tears threatening, the same overwhelming gratitude that had sustained him through the darkest moments of the past year. She would have loved that. "Speaking of which," Michelle said with a grin, "I have a surprise that's been 6 months in the making." She pulled out her phone and showed them a video call screen where a young woman in her early 20s was waving enthusiastically. "David, Sarah, meet Carmen Rodriguez. She was adopted as a baby, and she's been using the LifeBridge Technologies database to search for her biological family. Turns out she's Roberto's niece, which makes her our cousin." David stared at the screen, seeing familiar eyes and expressions in Carmen's face. "Roberto had a brother, who also struggled with medical expenses and financial hardship," Carmen said through the phone speaker. "My parents told me stories about Uncle Roberto and a woman named Angela who tried to help families like ours. When I heard about your company on the news, I knew I had to reach out." Sarah wiped her eyes. "Carmen's a nursing student at the University of Washington. She wants to specialize in kidney transplant patient care." "Following in the family tradition," David said with a laugh that was half tears. As they talked with Carmen about possibly joining the company as a client services coordinator after graduation, David reflected on how drastically his life had changed. A year ago, he'd been a successful but lonely investment advisor, carrying the weight of his adoptive mother's death and the uncertainty of his future. Now he was surrounded by family, not just Sarah and Michelle, but an extended network of cousins, clients, and employees who had become something like chosen family. "I have an announcement too," David said when they'd finished the call with Carmen. "I've been thinking about our expansion plans, and I want to propose something ambitious." He pulled up a presentation on his computer screen. "I want to establish Martinez-Williams offices in 5 major cities over the next 3 years. Each office would focus on a different aspect of healthcare investment: organ transplant research, chronic illness management, mental health treatment financing, and medical technology development." Michelle leaned forward, her business instincts engaged. "That's a significant capital investment. What's the projected timeline for profitability?" 18 months per office, based on our current growth patterns," David replied. "But more importantly, we'd be creating a national network of financial advisors who understand medical challenges from personal experience. We could help thousands of families avoid what ours went through." Sarah studied the projections. "It's ambitious, but achievable, and it honors everything our parents dreamed of building." As they discussed the details of their expansion plans, David's assistant knocked on the door. "Mr. Martinez, there's someone here to see you. He says he's from the Seattle Times and wants to interview you about the company's transformation." David looked at his sisters, remembering how they'd initially shied away from media attention during the worst of the scandal. Now, though, they'd learn to use their story to help other families facing similar challenges. "Send him in," David said, "but tell him we only do interviews together. This story belongs to all three of us." As they prepared to meet with the journalist, David thought about Angela's letter and her hope that they would be stronger together than alone. She'd been right in ways she probably never imagined. Not only had they saved Henderson's company and helped the families he'd hurt, but they'd also created something entirely new, a business built on the foundation of their shared values and their understanding of what families really needed during their most vulnerable moments. The journalist, a middle-aged man with a kind face and tired eyes, introduced himself as Tom Chen, Mrs. Chen's son, they discovered. "My mother worked for Mr. Henderson for 15 years, he explained. "She was devastated when the embezzlement came to light, but she's been so proud of what you three have accomplished." "Your mother was one of the people who convinced us to stay and fight for the company," Sarah told him. "She said the employees and clients deserved better than to lose everything because of one person's mistakes." As they settled into the interview, Tom asked the question that had become central to their story. "What would you tell other families who are struggling with the kind of challenges your family faced? Separation, medical expenses, financial hardship?" David looked at his sisters, then back at Tom. "We'd tell them that sometimes the greatest losses lead to the most unexpected discoveries. We lost our mother, our adoptive parents, and initially our trust in the man who'd been like a father to me. But in losing those things, we found each other, and we found our purpose." Michelle added, "We'd also tell them that healing doesn't happen overnight. It took us months to learn how to be siblings, how to trust each other, how to work together. But every difficult conversation, every disagreement we worked through, made us stronger. And most importantly," Sarah concluded, "we tell them that they're not alone. There are people who understand their struggles, who've walked similar paths, and who are ready to help. Sometimes family isn't just the people you're born to, it's the people you choose to build a life with." As the interview concluded and Tom packed up his recording equipment, David felt a deep sense of completion. They'd transformed a company built on guilt and exploitation into something that honored their parents' dreams. They'd turned their personal tragedy into a force for healing other families. And they'd discovered that the love Angela had written about in her letters, the love that connected them despite years of separation, was strong enough to overcome any challenge. The sun was setting over Seattle, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Through his office windows, David could see families walking together along the waterfront, children playing in parks, people building the kinds of ordinary, precious lives that his company now helped protect. His phone buzzed with a text from Carmen. "Just got accepted to the nursing program. Can't wait to join the family business next year." David smiled, forwarding the message to Sarah and Michelle. Their family kept growing, their mission kept expanding, and their mother's dream of helping families stay together through life's greatest challenges was becoming a reality that exceeded anything Angela could have imagined. In the end, David realized, the greatest investment they'd ever made wasn't in healthcare companies or technology stocks. It was in each other, and in the belief that love, once planted, could grow strong enough to heal even the deepest wounds. If you stayed with me until the end, thank you. That means your heart still beats for truth, for family, and for justice. This wasn't just a story. It was a reminder that pain has a memory, and sometimes it shows up when we least expect it. If it moved you, share it. If it made you cry, let someone else feel it too. Subscribe, because the next story, it might be even closer to your heart than you think. I'll be waiting for you, right here,